Wayne. I'm the program director for our App Suite program. My pronouns are she, her, and I am on the land of the Luiseno Paya people. So you heard from Sierra and you just heard from Emily, our training operations manager. We've also from our App Suite team have Jennifer Ovalle, our program assistant. Um, and then Megan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Don. I'm Megan Juring. I am the training coordinator for Adult Protective Services Leaders Institute. Welcome, everybody. And thank you to our presenters.
Thanks, Megan. So you've got the full support of our App Suite team here on our on this Leaders Institute workshop this morning. So we are here to talk about APS quality assurance nuts and bolts and how to get started in QA. This is a continuation of the previous two QA workshops that we had delivered. There was one in January with folks from Washington talking about key performance indicators versus qualitative benchmarks. And then we did another one with the folks from Washington in April, turning quality measurement information into quality improvement. And we just kept hearing more QA, more QA. And specifically, what we were hearing after those two workshops was a desire to have some discussion about what does QA look like for the counties within California? How do we apply some of that information that we heard in the previous workshops and apply it here within counties? And then also a need for the nuts and bolts. How do you get started, especially if you have limited to no resources available to devote to starting QA. So that's the purpose of today's workshop is to focus on how do you get started. And I think that a lot of you are going to come to find that you might think you're not doing anything for QA, but once you hear more about it, I think a lot of you are going to hear that you actually are doing some things around QA. A little bit of history before we get started. So why are we here today besides talking about QA? The one of the kind of the real big picture goals of the Leaders Institute is to help support APS and adult services leaders and to help you all make connections between colleagues. There's no one else that understands the very unique and challenging and hard work that you do like your colleagues do. So we want to support you in feeling supported and making those connections. We will be sending out a contact list following the workshop for any of you, for those of you that that opted in or did not opt out of that. So we'll be sharing that contact information with all of you following today's workshop. In terms of the agenda for today, we're going to start with a panel discussion, and then we will have a question and answer with the panelists. We'll move into breakout groups so that you'll all have an opportunity to talk about what you've heard and how to apply it. And then we'll do some debrief and evaluation. The evaluation is a very important piece of this. It's really important to us. We take what you tell us and we adjust from one workshop to the next. So please do feel free to make notes as we're going through about things you want us to know about what works well, things we should do more of, what didn't work quite so well, or what you would recommend changing. We really do want that feedback from you and value it. So now let's talk about our amazing panel. We have a number of county folks who are going to be presenting today. We have Ruth MacKenzie from Sacramento County, Alaina Carrel and Diane Martin from Tehama County, and Amy Leavitt from San Diego County. So you'll be hearing from each of them in just a moment. Before we get started on the presentations, I have two things. One is, Sierra, will you please launch the poll? We want to get a sense of the folks that are in the virtual room here right now. Are you currently doing something related to quality assurance? Just a simple yes or no. When we've done this in the past, we've usually been landing at about a 50-50. So it'll be interesting to see what this looks like today. Anyone else want to answer the poll question before we close it out? Just give it another couple of seconds. All right, Sierra, how did we end up? What is it looking like on this poll?
It looks like a little more than half, well, a bit more, 70% yes and 30% no.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sierra. So we've got 70% of the folks here today saying you're doing something related to quality assurance and 30% saying no. All right. So thank you. Very helpful. I want to lay a little bit of foundation before we start with the presentations. So again, we're talking about quality assurance, or the title of the workshop was quality assurance, but what we're really talking about it overall is quality management systems, and that encompasses QC, QA, QI, CQI. I'm going to explain what those are. So you might be doing one or two or all three. You might not be doing anything quite yet. All of that's fine. That's what we're here for today. So there's one component is QC, or quality control. And quality control is often reactive. It's often something that's done after the fact to detect and correct issues. Then there's QA, quality assurance. That's typically proactive, focusing on meeting standards or measuring compliance. And then there's QI or CQI, quality improvement or continuous quality improvement. And that has to do more with moving towards excellence, determining quality and effectiveness, creating an environment for continuous improvement. And I'll copy and paste those into the chat in just a moment. So without further ado, we'll now start getting started with our panel presentations. And first up is Ruth MacKenzie from Sacramento County.
Hello. Well, here we are. And like Dawn said, I'm from Sacramento County. I'm currently a division manager. I came to Sacramento County in the Adult Protective Services role about 12 years ago, following stints of employment in child welfare as well as in homeless. And when I first got there, I arrived just a few months after another manager whom I respected very much throughout my career. And you're going to get to meet, some of you will get to meet her later. And we came from the environment of child welfare where we're looking at everything all the time. And it was really surprising when we got to Adult Protective Services and we found that investigations were about 4 sentences long. We were mortified. Our organization had created and implemented their first digital paperless system prior to LEAP's implementation, and they were using that. So it was lovely to be digital, but the quality of what we saw really just kind of made our heads spin. And so, of course, we wanted to do something, but then it becomes is everything really a mess? Or is it just different than what we're used to seeing? And so we had to assess and come up with some priorities between us about what was most important and also about our approach. And so we began first with this piece of wisdom that you see on the screen, and that is that knowledge that the thing that is looked at is the thing that changes. The other foundational value we carried with us, and we carry it with us to this day, is that if you measure everything, you basically end up measuring nothing, because in looking at too many things all at once, you lose your audience, you lose your engagement. And so today I want to talk to you about the different history of what we went through and some of our foundational values and guiding principles and some of the wisdom of the how and the why we did what we did. In the event that you don't hear anything that I say, it's perfectly okay, because most of you are using the LEAPS data system, and LEAPS has built-in data reports for you. So those are going to help you on quality assurance, even if you don't absorb some of what we're talking about today, but you've got the tools. It's about using them. So some of our foundational values is we're not afraid of quality assurance. That was the nice thing about working in the world of child welfare, that it was very normal for us to be evaluated, to have other people, whether it was a supervisor or whether it was at the time somebody from the state or some other entity like another office or something of that nature, looking at our work, and that was very normal. So we didn't feel threatened or scared. We also understand that the manner of quality assurance is forever evolving. It doesn't start out any one way and stay that way forever. We don't keep measuring the same thing year after year, day after day, because after you learn the themes, move on to the next thing. It should be something that you build upon, not something that you're looking at year after year after year after year and say, yep, we got a trend. So what? We want it to be something that helps us make a decision. We've got lots of stories about victories, things that we did really well, surprises that we had along the way, as well as things that were teaching moments for us, things that we would do differently now. Nothing's truly a failure so long as you continue to grow. And in the QA universe, basically, mistakes in administration, whether it's the wrong model of assurance or the incorrect data element or unintentional messages, we have to treat it as growth. We can't ever walk away and say, we're not going to do this anymore. It doesn't matter, because it always matters. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm a pretty simple person. You'll see from the slides. I'm a big fan of less is more. Basically, 100 years ago, I read a compelling quote that really resonated with me, and it said that every system is perfectly designed to get exactly the results that it gets. So when we look out at our system and we say that we're not performing well in recurrence, we're not performing well in helping homeless people, we're not performing well in helping people over the age of 85, we're not doing well at getting people meaningfully connected to aftercare services, it's because somewhere in our system, and when I say our system, I don't mean the APS system, I mean the broader system of social services and social supports to our communities. But everything, if we get the outcomes we get because of the way the systems are designed. QA is basically a first attempt to understand why things look the way that they do. And we'll come away understanding that no issue is black and white. Every issue is multifaceted. There are lots of factors that go into why do things look the way that they do. They have a context, they have a history, they have maybe political winners and losers. There are lots of things that go into the we're still back on there. Yeah, there you go. Back on context. There's many layers to it. QA is performed as a basis for a goal of eventual change, meaning the change might be that we want to go from a lower level compliance to a higher level compliance. We want to go from one type of outcome to a different type of outcome. We want to go from a certain number of people being served to a different number of people served. But quality assurance usually is the nexus for change. How you do quality assurance really matters, because there are people and egos and feelings attached. And the moment you walk in and say, oh, we'd like to do QA, immediately people's hackles go up and they get very afraid and they get nervous and they get defensive. Because remember, the system looks the way that it does for a reason, which means there are people that have existed in organizations for a long time before you came along saying, oh, let's measure. These people came along and they had investments. They built the system. They they designed the trainings. They said, this is the performance that we want in the way that we want. And if we come along and we measure it and then make a pronouncement that says, oh no, that's all wrong, we need to do it another way, we've lost our team. You've cut off your champions because the message was, we did the wrong thing, we did it bad, we did, so we always want to pay attention to the message and the how of what we say. They, our hope always, as we introduce any kind of measurement, that we do it with language of we and us and our, that it's language of collaboration rather than language of division or us and them or victim villain. None of this, well, you all did this, so now we've come along, or the old way was this and the new way is this. When we start using language like that, it makes camps, it builds fiefdoms, and we never want to do that. Instead, we want to say that, thank goodness, so much building has happened to this point. Thank goodness we've got as much as we've got now. Now let's see how we can grow what we have now to another level or to do other things. What we found in our process, that's why I like the language of CQI so much, because it tends to incorporate the language of collaboration foundationally. You don't think twice about using the old language of, why did you do that? When we ask people why, that immediately puts people on defensive. Isn't that the first rule we learn in social work school when we're learning about how to engage clients? They teach you, don't start with why. You need to answer the why, but don't ask the question why, because it puts people on the defensive. That wisdom is accurate. So again, we want to say, how come it looks this way? Or, what are the dynamics that have led to this? Tell me more about the history of that. Or, if you were in charge, what else would we be saying? When we think about QA, we always want to be cautious about, is the way that we're doing this, approaching it, the way that we're measuring it, asking it, interviewing, any of our techniques, is it in any way a form of gotcha? Because gotcha is just cruel. And that's another way to just make divisiveness. And so we have to always be hyper attentive to our message of, again, we together want to make our organization, our product better for everyone. Because when we do things better, it makes safety for older people in our community, right? Who's going to argue with that? It's a very simple and compelling message that we all can resonate one. I like the idea of appreciative inquiry. That we care about why it looks the way that it does. I'm one of these nerdy old ones that's worked around the organization 100 years. So when somebody comes along and they say, well, why do you do it that way? Or why do you do it this way? I immediately retreat, and then I get defensive, and I'm flagging away my mother who lives next door to me. And anyway, when we use appreciative inquiry, we can invite people to participate as team members rather than dispel them because they do it in an antiquated way. If you come to me and I'm a dinosaur and you tell me I'm a dinosaur, I'm just going to get my feelings hurt, because I'm really proud of all the things that I've done and the way that I've done it with the limited resources that I have. There's a whole generation of people that did it paper and pencil and manually, right? Some of the tools we're going to see later today are from the efforts of manual calculations. And that's what you have to do when you start from nothing. And we all, unfortunately, have started from a place of nothing. When we get results of QA processes, ideally, best case scenario, not only can we attend to community gaps, but we can validate the need for additional resources. We can modify practice, and best case scenario, we can help individual staff members be a little bit better than they thought they could be. You know, when you get people who finally get the idea that this isn't something to be afraid of, but it truly is a tool, it's the most magical thing. And I want to tell you a little story about how we had that happen. And we'll go ahead and advance the next slide. First off, quality assurance, it happens continuously. You, like somebody said earlier, you don't realize that your organization is likely already doing it. You're doing it annually. Every time you roll up your information and aggregate it, whenever you wrap up and say, well, we did 2,000 investigations per year, and this is the age band, and of the 2,000 investigations, about a third of them were conclusive, and 25% of them were for financial abuse, and about 10% of them were for physical abuse. And do you see that those numbers kind of jive because they're kind of consistent throughout? You know, the counties, you'll find that the 10%, the 25%, those are accurate across multiple counties. Yeah, that's a form of quality assurance. It isn't meant to be, but it is a reporting out. And in reporting out, it means that we have an audience who cares. We also report monthly to the state through the form of the 242. Anytime our social workers are meeting with their supervisors, that's a form of quality assurance because they're talking through not only what happened, but what didn't happen. QA can also happen in a random format where you have either some sort of an analyst, a supervisor, sometimes you have a quality assurance unit or office where they'll come through and they have no investment. They're not one of those people that helped build it to look the way that it looks. So they have feelings around, don't change my model because I built it. And if you tell me that it's wrong, then my ego's hurt. The people that come in from QA, they're not coming in that way. They're not coming in to play gotcha. They're simply coming in to say, let's look at what we have in front of us and what does this mean? And so they're neutral. And it doesn't feel that way because the thing about when they come in, whether it's the state who comes in through IHSS or whether it's our own QA units, they never nobody comes in and with a finding that says everything's perfect. I've never had that happen in my whole career, that somebody does a QA at any level and says there's absolutely no problems. You all are just perfect. Never happens. So of course we have feelings about that, but the way that the message gets delivered and having some strength of ego ourselves about this is all for the common good of the community, for the practice, and for the development of our workforce. Because the fact of the matter is, nobody shows up and says, well, you know, I think I'd like to do a mediocre job that doesn't really matter. You know, as times change and new people join our ranks, the need for meaningful work becomes omnipresent, right? Newer workers really want to do work that matters. And so if we're giving them information basically about compliance, that's interesting, but it doesn't tell them about their meaning. So I want to talk about some different levels of quality assurance. We'll move on to the next slide, and this is where I'm going to spend quite a bit of the rest of my discourse today. The how. Social workers, because that's us, we're all social workers. We all went to social work school and we all learned about relationships and how to engage people and how to care about people and how to assess people and how to read between the lines. But most of us got pretty nervous when we had to do the qualitative methods class, right? That one didn't feel so good to us. And most of us aren't very comfortable around numbers. We find that the word data is kind of an unnerving word. But one of our managers, I really loved the way she framed it. She said, data is simply another word for information. And if we can create a culture that is collaborative, we do this because it makes APS better for our community. We're not doing this to play gotcha. We're not trying to find the worst employee at APS. We're not asking that question. Those aren't the questions we're asking. That really we're gathering information about what do we do well, what do we need to grow, and what do we need to change in our practice so that we can do things better. Yesterday, literally, QA comes to you in a number of different ways, formally and informally. Informally, I get it at lunchtime. So yesterday, the person you're going to meet later, she and we got together with one of our community resource people, and we said, how's our staff doing? You know, what do we need to know? And she gave us the most critical piece of information. She said, you know, sometimes your social workers don't call me and tell me when they close a case. And I'm busy working on restraining orders and services for this person. And if I don't know that APS has closed their case, it impacts my work. Well, how simple is that, right? That wasn't find the jerk. That wasn't gotcha. That was simply an important piece of feedback that we can rapidly incorporate into our workplace by simply letting our social workers know, hey, the practice we need you to do when you're closing cases is to let the people that you're collaborating with, you know, truly collaborate. Don't just close the case and walk away, but instead the practice we need you to do is to call the collaborators and say, my intent is to close the case. Is there anything else you need? And so what that practice will do is it will enhance how we work, right? We're going to make sure that there's a warm handoff. We're going to make sure that everybody's apprised as to what's going on with the client so that we've got decreased possibility of recurrence, right? So very simple things like that. That's a form of QA. It's informal. It's not going to be measured anywhere, but it happened. We are constantly doing that. Anybody that's in a supervisorial role is continuously doing that all the time. And when we can do it, not from a place of protect my flock, management's going to get them, but instead from a how do we help them soar? How do we help them use their wings to better serve our community? Then we start to get a very special synergy. So let's use data not as gotcha, but data as information to grow. So as we talk about data, you don't need to know what heteroskedasticity is in order to do QA. What we do need to know about data is we need to know basic things, all the stuff we were taught in school. What, how many? We need to understand the difference between median and average. We need to know about bands. We need to know about dummy variables, categorical variables, how those work. Ideally, we could do qualitative analysis with content, thematic content, coding that content, observational QA. But all of that happens constantly. And again, you don't even realize it. We work with these processes daily without using those terms. When a supervisor does case reviews, they're doing qualitative constantly. There's not a time that a supervisor goes through and is simply looking for compliance, right? They are looking at, did we do the work that was necessary for this vulnerable person to be safe, right? That's the nice thing about so many of us coming from the child welfare world is we have generally a shared value around the need for safety. And that's a language that we reflexively have now.
One more minute, Ruth.
Mm-hmm. Oh my timer went off and here I was just babbling away. Oh my gosh. So in Sacramento, we do things like there's different layers of QA. So when you think about QA, the most basic QA is going to be compliance QA. Did you do it? Did you comply with the Division 33 regulations, or didn't you? When we look at case management kinds of quality assurance, you're going to look at things like interview protocol, and did you use screening tools, yes or no? Did your employee do completion of collateral contacts? Did they do referrals? Did they follow up on the referrals? Did they let the referrals know that they were backing out of the case when APS goes to close? Did they make crime reports? Was their documentation timely? That's a second layer of quality assurance. Then you get into advanced practice around consultation, resource management, depth of the safety plan. And that's where you definitely want the external QA staff to come in and kind of look at cases from a beginning to the end. So the next counties that are going to be presenting, they're going to show you what some of these tools look like. I'm just talking about broader theory. Take away today that you've already got the tools, and B, remember, whatever you do, there are people involved. There are people who it looks the way that it does because someone built it to look that way. And if you start to dismantle it, do it in such a way that it's we, not us versus them. Make it so that it's collaborative and that we grow around a compelling vision of safety for our community. I think that basically cuts down into the nutshell. And yes, do it kindly wherever possible.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I want to
Yes.
make sure you know you're getting some appreciation in the chat.
Oh, okay. Because I got distracted because my mom came in the window. I don't understand. I'm doing a presentation today, right now. And
Mom.
she was going to sneak in, Dawn. She was going to sneak in.
Like we're gonna see Ruth's mom here sometime during this workshop.
Every single time, or a dog. Anyway, thank you all very much. And look, the next presenters are going to show you actual tools, which are really cool.
Thanks so much, Ruth. All right, now we are going to hear from Alaina Carrel and Diane Martin from Tehama County.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
I think we're waiting for our slides, getting through. There we are. Hello, we are from Tehama County.
I guess next slide. That's kind of basic one.
That's us.
So good morning from Tehama County. I'm Diane Martin, and I am the APS social worker supervisor. And through the social worker series, I started in adult service with as IHSS and then APS social worker, and then went to quality assurance social worker. Right, pass it on.
And my name is Alaina Carrel, and I started as a social worker, promoted to quality assurance social worker, and then promoted to adult services supervisor for APS and IHSS, specifically overseeing our quality assurance positions. We have a little bit of background information about our county. So we are considered a medium county as far as IHSS is concerned. We are a smaller rural county in Northern California. For IHSS, we have about 1,300 cases. We have 8 social workers. And for APS, we have an average of 80 referrals received monthly and 6 social workers working in that department. We have 2 quality assurance social workers for IHSS and APS, and 3 social service aides. Next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how we implemented an APS QA in Tehama County. In Tehama County, our IHSS and APS departments were housed together, and so we work very closely. We implemented our county quality assurance as a position. It's a social worker position that is the social worker quality assurance. It's similar to how IHSS allocates their quality assurance in their program. We were able to create this quality assurance position because we had growth in our county of IHSS cases. We had recently graduated from a small county to a medium county. We had previously one IHSS quality assurance position, and we needed half of an IHSS quality assurance position. So we started looking into how we can implement an APS quality assurance. We were also able to justify this additional APS position as we had a growing need for APS in our community, and we needed a designated APS trainer in addition to APS quality assurance to review the APS quality. The APS quality assurance position took on those roles as well. We also closely modeled the way that the APS quality assurance reviewed APS cases to the way that our IHSS quality assurance reviewed IHSS cases, so that most of our social workers would already be accustomed to that process. So I'll hand it over to Diane in the next slide.
All right, so kind of the goals and expectations of our APS quality assurance, the role, and what the quality assurance, what it meant for our county. So as she was talking before, they collaborate between both IHSS and APS. So they work closely because APS social worker, quality assurance social worker, shares some of the duties regarding what IHSS does. So they also do some IHSS desk reviews and field reviews. They help train and do outreach together. But then as far as her role just as an APS quality assurance social worker, she will complete desk reviews for APS. And so we started out really small when we first started. So only doing 5 desk reviews a month. And they were on already closed cases. And then we moved it up to doing 5 assigned cases, and then also making sure that she got some intake ones. So looking at the NERS and the NTDs, and so adding like 3 of those a month, and sharing the wealth, at least QAing at least 1 case of each social worker. And she uses if you're in Leaps County, she will use the caseload report and look at the detailed Excel, and that's where she can get what cases have recently been closed. So she's doing working on recent cases. So also her role, she also is training the new APS social workers, and that involves keeping up with the training binder, the regulations, our best practices. She'll work through cases starting from intake, the referrals, to the interaction resources out in the field investigations, to documenting into LEAPs. And she's also ongoing, questions, answering questions nonstop, ongoing or new social workers and ongoing ones. So then also with that, training ongoing APS workers based on common findings that are found in the QA reviews that she's, and through observation as well. So this can entail doing group trainings at our unit meetings. Just recently, she did a PowerPoint, and after she probably did about a month of QA reviews and kind of saw that what was common or what we were missing, and this working with her and the supervisors, our analysts, we kind of going, because you keep after changing. We're looking through our forms and we're like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense now. We're not doing that. Like, for instance, we had a home safe component on there, but now we don't have home safe, so we don't need that. And we were looking at how to make everyone be consistent on how they put their documentation into LEAPS. And so that was a big part of her PowerPoint. Went through everything. They have a copy of the PowerPoint. And so now we can make sure that we are focusing on that when we're looking at cases as a supervisor when I'm closing them out as well. Then she can also individual trainings for folks that, you know, we all have sometimes that glitch. Everyone has that where some folks have an issue with intakes, putting in a referral that they get stuck on a certain point, or so you can she'll just go with social workers and individualize train them. And then she can go out and perform APS investigations when needed, which can happen if there's a flux of referrals coming in and everyone's slammed. We can have her go out on a couple, and she's also bilingual, so that's helpful as well. You can go out on those cases as well. And then if there's vacation leaves or budget, and that's where we currently are, is with budget. So she's out in the field again. So as you can see, the QA, it comes and goes, and yeah, that's the challenge, but we'll get to that later. That's one of our struggles later. So next slide, please. So this is a look at what our APS QA desk review looks like, and we formatted it off of our IHSS, and also looking at other counties and other APS programs QAs. So, you know, you don't have to invent the wheel. You can get ideas from other counties and you make it work to how for your county. So I think our forms are in to be able for everyone to use. So that's going to be passed out to, I think, to everyone, or it's already been. So feel free to use what you want and take what you need from it. But so it's APS regulation and our county's best practice driven. So, you know, we started out, it's simple, the intakes, client details, risk assessments, you have the regulations, the 10-day response, were we out on time? So the basic regulations. Also, there's some best practices in there of where we put information into LEAPS and if the contacts were complete and followed up on the service plan, you know, so everything's in there. Next slide, please. And this is just the more of the same, and just the last few pages. As you can see, like there's red down here because we're always evolving. We're going into our policy and procedures meetings, and we meet and we'll go over the review, and we'll have questions like, why do we have that in there? And does that make sense? And so we'll look at it and we'll change things around. So that's something we are looking at currently. Next slide, please. And this is our tracking reviews. So we have it, this is just a little blurb of it. So there's all of the quarters, starting quarter 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And this is just has a list of the social worker's name, the case name, areas with findings and comments, so we can keep track of which social workers are needing more assistance with certain areas. Next slide, please. And this is a review summary. This was back in, I can't read that, 2022, where our social worker at the time. And so this one will calculate, it's formatted to calculate when you put in if there's mistakes and what a percentage in this area, how many mistakes in this area. But of course, we were only doing 15 for the whole quarter, so it's not like a big pool to go from. But as we grow, we're hoping this form will help us as we grow. and then you can put comments in all the areas there. Like I said, it's always evolving and creating and changing the policies and the forms to fit what's changing with APS and our county. All right, next slide, please. Oh, I think
this one's mine. So, in the past APS QA trainings, I've heard a lot of concerns about getting the staff on board with the APS QA. In our county, we feel like we've actually had quite a bit of success with our APS QA program. And a few of the reasons that we feel like that is number one, having support from the leadership. And this goes back just to our IHSS QA as well. We just happen to have many of our supervisors and program managers in the past decade or so be promoted from IHSS quality assurance. So there's been a lot of support from the leadership with the QA. They've also supported the reviews as they would follow up with their staff if quality assurance reviews were not completed. It's part of the social workers' expectations to complete the quality assurance reviews for both APS and IHSS, and their compliance with them is noted in their evaluations. This was one of the reasons that the social workers started to respect the work and the position of the quality assurance, because this wasn't always the case in the past. We have had pushback on the quality assurance through IHSS, but as we've gotten buy-in from the leadership positions, it started to improve. Consistent messaging that quality assurance is not a punishment, it's a learning tool. The social workers aren't being punished or reprimanded for having to correct or having findings in their reviews. Another one is that the social workers want consistency and clear expectations. They've actually started asking for more quality assurance reviews on cases because if they get a case that was previously with a different social worker and there are inconsistencies with the case documentation, or even the way that the case was handled, it can lead to more work issues or more work for the current social worker. Recently, due to budgeting, we've had to pull back on our APS quality assurance social worker, and the other social workers have expressed that they want the reviews to continue. They were disappointed when we announced that we'd have to pull back our quality assurance for APS, because they've expressed that they want it, which we actually thought was kind of shocking, even that they expressed such an interest in keeping it. And they also want clear expectations. They want the QA trainings during the unit meetings, and they want to see what findings that the QA is finding. And also the APS quality assurance is regarded as a lead worker role. They're the trainer for the APS social workers, and the APS workers, as Diane mentioned earlier, will often ask the quality assurance social workers questions when the supervisors aren't available. Sometimes even when the supervisors are available, I hear them asking the QA position, but I'm okay with that. And it garners respects from the other social workers. It also helps in this role if the QA positions have training or experience with being a lead worker. So trainings with like emotional intelligence and like to keep certain things, confidential, and that we don't just share everything with the other floor staff. I think that's also really important to have respect within the QA position. So next slide, please. Diane, I'll throw it back to you.
All right. So our struggles, the first one for everyone, where do you begin? Where do you start with? And you don't have, so for like IHSS, they have mandates. You kind of know what's expected from a QA program. So there's no existing regulations or mandates to follow, and it has to evolve, continuously, like I was saying before. So that's a struggle where to begin. I'd say, get some examples of where you want to start, or what type of tools you want to use, or what are you trying to QA? Is it the smaller picture or the bigger picture? For us, we're doing like the regulations. Are we getting the work in time? Are we consistent on where we're putting our data, our documentation? Can another social worker go into a case and find it and know what's going on? Are we like doing those service plans, working those collaterals? So it's more so we're not getting into like all the big data of the program and the different populations and we're kind of just starting with us in the county. Staffing and budget, that's always a big, we started this in about 2020, and I think maybe, I don't know if we got a good year in, and then we had to stop because of staffing. And so that the social worker had to go back to, working with IHSS more. So, and then, so we hired this another position, and we're like, all right, we're rolling, we're going to get going and starting out strong. And then we have budget cuts this year, and we're on a hiring hold. So, and within that hiring hold time, we had a social worker move and we had another one retire. So now our QA social worker is back out doing APS investigations. So we're kind of on hold again. So those are the struggles, but we just keep going. And Alaina's going to talk though on a positive note. Next slide, please.
So the positive are successes with APS QA have been that we've been able to refine best practices with both documentation and investigations. This position has allowed for more in-depth reviews that the social worker may not be able to have time for. With this role, we have created a lead worker position for APS, and that has the expertise to be able to conduct outreach to community partners. While that position has been doing more APS investigations, we continue to have her go out and do some community outreach for APS. And even though we have not always been able to implement this position, we have created an environment that will also always welcome it back. Like I mentioned earlier, the social workers, the APS social workers want the QA to be happening. So they want it to come back. They're like, please continue doing it. So we'll try our best during these budget cuts. But yeah, we've had really positive feedback from the social workers on it recently. So that's our presentation. That's how APS QA works in Tehama County. So I hope that if you feel like your county is similar in size or anything like that, that you can find inspiration and take what you can from our experience.
Thanks so much, Alaina and Diane.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your county's experience, and I also really appreciate your willingness to just talk in a very real way about these have been the ups and the downs and the struggles and the stops and the starts, because that is very much a reality of working in a county and working in a county APS program, especially in APS, not a mandate. So and how you got started. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Now our next presenter, Amy Leavitt from San Diego County.
Hey, everybody. I hate to be the one that throws the tech glitch into this, but I'm wondering if I could request that we take our morning break now. I'm getting a message right now saying I'm going to have an automatic restart on my computer in 5 minutes, and it's not giving me the wait till later message. Would it be possible to do that? And then we can come back?
Yes, we can do that. Thank you for the heads up. And technology, like work the way you're supposed to. Why?
It's trying to work the way it's supposed to. It just didn't give me any notice.
No. It's like help, don't hinder. Yes, we can absolutely. Well,
Thank
so
you so much.
it's gonna start
I'm going to restart right now.
Okay, all right. So we will take a 5-minute comfort break and we will see you. Everyone, welcome back. I don't know if we have Amy back quite yet. I don't think so. I'm searching in the participants. So this is unfortunate timing, and I know that Amy will be back on as quickly as she's able. And App Suite team, if or when you see Amy Leavitt come back on, will you give me a heads up? As people are coming back, I want to let you know that the forms that Tehama and shared and that San Diego is going to share are included in the participant manual, and they were also sent out as separate attachments. So you'll find those there, and that is an example of the helpful feedback that you share with us. We had gotten feedback from you all that it would be helpful to have the tools that presenters share to the extent possible ahead of time as part of the participant manual, so that as they are talking about the tools that you have them there to refer to. So those are included. I was also wondering, and this might come up as part of the Q&A, and I've heard LEAPS mentioned quite a bit by presenters. Will you raise your hand if your county does not use LEAPS? I'm wondering if we have anyone attending today that is not. Oh, Karen. Okay, thank you. I see. So Placer, Santa Clara do not use LEAPS. Any other counties or folks that are on the workshop that do not use LEAPS? I'm
Dawn,
looking for
Amy
you.
just
Yes.
joined.
Thank you. Okay, great. So it looks like we just have two counties that are not using LEAPS. All right. And Amy Leavitt, how's it going?
Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. Oh, my apologies. I appreciate all of your patience.
And good idea. Thank you for presenting an issue and a solution. So that was very helpful.
Oh my goodness. Well, like you started off from the top to prepare us for it, right? We all manage our emotions, and I'm so excited to do this. So it couldn't come at a worse time when your computer says we're going to make you shut down, and so I appreciate everybody's patience in that. Thank you so much. I'm Amy Leavitt. I'm a supervisor with Adult Protective Services down in San Diego County, and our QA started long before I got there 7 years ago in the idea of wanting to check cases and wanting to know where we were at and what we were doing and all those things, and the idea of if you had more staff or if you had more support or what would be the things that you would love to have, and then manager Chris O'Leary, who many of you know, and I were sitting next to each other in a NAPSA conference or a workshop that talked about QA, and all of a sudden light bulbs were going off, and it was like, wait a minute, we're doing that. We just hadn't standardized it. We hadn't written it into policy, but we knew we were doing it. She was my manager and I was the supervisor. So then it was just a matter of how do we take credit for what we're doing? And it sounds like a lot of counties are doing more than what they think they're doing. And if they formalize it and they take credit for what they're doing, then that they'll feel like they're ahead of the game too. And so with the next slide, please. Dawn touched on it a bit, that idea of QC versus QA and getting to a place where it's continuous. So it would be like CQI. The idea that we want to come to some agreement on what we're measuring. We want to look at it. We want to evaluate what our goals are. How do we incorporate everybody at all the different levels into it? How are we transparent in it? What steps can we take to then get to the next place we want to be, or correct some areas we want to develop and improve in, and then keep going around the circle. So it's just a cycle. So it's not a failure in your QA or your CQI if you're always changing it, if you're always looking at the next thing. Those of you that are familiar with Strengths Finders or Gallup Clifton Strengths, no, I'm a maximizer. I am always looking for the next level thing. It doesn't mean that I'm unsatisfied or that I don't see all the great stuff we're doing. It just means that I look at everything through what would be the next thing that we could take it to the next level, right? So where do we go from there and circle around? And then all the different people that can be involved in that process. So, and the next slide. With that in mind, down in San Diego, the idea of having separate staff, Ruth did a really great job for us, right, of painting this like umbrella and this kind of bigger overview of things to be thinking about. And so when we were able to have staff, they're APS staff, but when we're able to have our program and policy support staff, do these, their idea of pulling a sample size and doing it the way we remember from college when we were doing those kind of that kind of research is trying to use their best methods to create a formal tool with specific data points that they're measuring. Their goal is to do quarterly QAs on either a full case, the way Diane was presenting those tools, where it could be a full case review, or they could do a specific subject. Like, we just want to look at our service plans. We just want to look at findings and consistency in findings. We just want something specific, right? And then the reviewers could change too. It could be supervisor, done at a supervisor level, where you're doing QA on other cases that have been closed or open. It could be workers that are doing QA on other workers' things, so that they're getting that bigger lens too, right? Senior workers included in that. So that's kind of a side piece, and how they design their tool, how they pull their sample size, that's a much more formalized way of doing QA. And it does require staffing, right? It requires people resources. It requires time and effort to design that tool, to evaluate the data, to present it in a way that it makes sense to see how policy is doing and where program improvement could be. So that is a separate thing. Today I'm chatting about APS QA and what we can do at the supervisor level, so that we are evaluating cases, each case when it's done at closing. Every case gets looked at for specific standards. And it could be that always happens at closing, but it could be there's other prompts that prompt you to use the tools to evaluate a case through a QA lens. It could be a fatality that you want to look at. It could be a high profile case that ended up in the news media, and you want to see where were we at, what were our standards, and it could be just an interest level in a specific, topic du jour almost, like a specific financial abuse, let's say, or something that's getting a lot of attention. And we want to see, what do our numbers look like? What are we doing on that? And then these are more informal tools. We have some formal and some informal, but they're individualized. So the next slide. The benefits to doing to the entire department, the bigger benefits out there. This is how you're getting in the buy-in, right? Is by pointing out the benefits of doing it. The idea to the entire department is that a large county, right? In contrast to the numbers that were presented from Tehama County, where they're getting 80 referrals a month. I'm getting 100 in just my unit alone in San Diego. So, and there are another 18, 20 other units. So, it's a larger county, but that makes it even harder to be consistent, right? Any given supervisor, any given worker at all the different levels, the regions that we're in. We want to increase consistency. That's always a goal to try and do. We want to submit quality numbers for those data reports like the 242. We want to identify areas where there's training, both at individual units, but also at the program level, and training for when we're first onboarding staff, and also ongoing skill development for our seasoned staff. The QA points out those areas for training. Can help us recognize gaps in services. If we're having difficulty closing a case because there isn't a room for a warm handoff with a certain community service provider, there could be issues with our clients who are eligible for VA benefits, but they're having difficulty navigating those waters. You could recognize areas where is there a place, maybe not APS's place, is there another community partner that could help us with that gap and trying to bridge that for clients. It can help us support requests for resources, even if that's people, right? We can identify what are the great things we're able to do when we have the staffing that we want. If we could get caseloads to this point, what do those client outcomes look like versus when caseloads are at a certain number? And it can also help us identify, related to the training idea, but it can also help us identify where maybe our policies are not clear for staff. Like it was mentioned before, staff typically, they thrive with clear expectations, but we're always changing, right? So making sure that our policies and our practices are keeping up to date and that we're communicating those well. QA can help us do that too. So the department-wide can benefit from this lens of how we do supervisor QA and how to support our supervisors with that. And the next slide. Specifically for supervisors and this process, we need a program-wide, in order to capitalize on any of those benefits, we need a program-wide agreement on what the minimum standards are for what the workers are doing on the case, but also what the supervisors are doing when they're reviewing cases, when they're supporting their staff. We need to have that be a program-wide agreement. So the managers and chiefs or whatever level of the executives are deciding what the minimum standards are. The supervisors are, there's plenty of seasoned supervisors, but there's a lot of new supervisors too. When a new supervisor comes on, they are offered, shadow and training time from their peers. And we offer them up our tools. And our tools are individualized to what will help us remember and to be checking for those program-wide agreed upon standards. So two supervisors' tools could look very different. They could look they will automatically look similar because we have program-wide agreement on what those standards are. But what any individual supervisor needs on their checklist or on their tool could be different. And there's a minimum. And the formatting that is used could be different too. Don't want to put on two rose-colored glasses here because it's not that all supervisors are, this isn't in everybody's strengths. This can be very challenging and draining for some supervisors, and some love it and some super excel at it. And so also building up that idea of different tools are going to work for different supervisors and their strengths, and how we can help them build relationships with their team and their manager so that when they're using these tools to review the cases, they're reviewing whether the case is ready to close, what items maybe need to be corrected, what things can they do? Can they do the quick correction themselves to close? What things would be returned to a worker? They're looking for what to elevate in that concerning things, but also really great best practices, right? They're looking for those standout, awesome highlights too, because can we repeat that? Can we incorporate that into our policy or our best practices? When we're seeing patterns that are really great, how can we elevate that? Outside of one worker silo or one unit silo, how can we get that out to the program? And then those patterns and trends for follow-up, for training, or for concerns for performance, or maybe there's a community, a stakeholder or a contractor that we're using that we're seeing repeat concerns on those cases. Those come up on these closings too. Next slide, please. This is one example. Oh my gosh, I just got one of those messages saying it's going to restart again. I don't know what to tell you. This is one example. There are a couple of tools I have back to back in here. I could switch over to my cell phone if I need to and do Zoom on my cell phone too. So if it makes me, I don't understand. I'm so sorry.
Okay. If we lose you, then we'll know the backup plan. Oh, did Amy just drop off? Yes. Okay. So we will wait for, this is technology. Sierra, thank you so much for what you mentioned at the beginning, because just technology stuff is bound to happen. And sometimes at the absolute worst times. Oh, Chris, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I apologize. Our county must have got tired of people snoozing updates and they no longer give us the ability to snooze. But we have complained that many of us have professional jobs and we might be in the middle of something important. So
Yeah.
hopefully she will be back quickly, because I hope you're finding what she has to say really helpful. She's one of our really excellent supervisors in kind of managing this kind of QA that might seem informal, but it's actually so important. Checking those cases at closing and making sure that we're following consistent, at least minimum standards, and identifying trends that she's going to talk more about. Not to steal her thunder.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
John, I actually have a question if I could sneak it in at this point.
Sure.
And, I've observed, from all three presenters that there are some pretty exceptional people, and maybe they're not exceptional, but like, how do you find that APS QA analyst / trainer / outreach person in Tehama? How do you train them? And in San Diego, like, how do you train all these supervisors? That's a lot of supervisors to be working at this level. So is it, training? Is it part of recruitment? Like, how does that infrastructure get built with excellent people?
In San Diego, we typically promote our supervisors from within. So we've had an opportunity to see them and mentor people into the supervisor role. Amy actually wasn't one of those people. She came to us from Child Welfare Services, but you can tell she's very dynamic, and that maximizer, a strength that she has of wanting to make things better. She just jumped into the role of learning this, and she's so careful in her conversations. We do have a large number of supervisors and many new ones now as we've grown exponentially over just the last few years. So we do a lot of peer sharing. We match the supervisors together to sit with each other, learn from each other. And like Amy said, we might have minimum standards, but everybody operates a little differently. So we want them to meet with all of our other supervisors and kind of find the one that's like, oh, how you do it, your way you do your tool kind of matches my way of doing things. So I can adopt that or tweak it a little bit. So that's kind of our way of supporting them, is to match them together and do a lot of cross training. They do a lot of discussions among themselves and help each other out, and continually upping their game and what we look at and how we grow our program and look at what's going on.
Thanks, Chris. And Diane, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, for like Tehama County, well, Elaine and I both came from being a QA social worker, so we know that role. And I think just from observing social workers, which ones would be stronger in that position, you kind of, coach them and hope that when that position comes up that they will apply. And with ours, like for the outreach portion of it, they were fighting tooth and nail. They don't want to do that outreach. But we saw something in them that they didn't, they're nervous, and it's difficult. And now they've been practicing, and at first it was within the agency, and they've done their first going out in the community, and they got compliments, and so it's getting easier for them. And so but do you have anything else to add, Alaina, that with the how we kind of come up with them and train them?
Yeah, I mean, typically in our county, the quality assurance, if we had a new person go from social worker to quality assurance social worker, they would be trained by probably the supervisor. If we don't have an existing quality assurance, like if we had to start from scratch and get new quality assurance positions, probably be trained by the supervisors. Luckily for like IHSS, there's a list of things that you have to do for quality assurance. That's not the privilege we have in APS yet. So that's why we kind of followed that IHSS model so closely. But there's, you can change it to fit how it works in your county, which is kind of nice at this time. But yeah, typically they'd be trained, and like Diane said, you just want to look for like leadership qualities in someone, typically, or trainings that would be good for a leadership position. If that's like an outside training with Fred Pryor or something like that, or even just internal, trying to find different learning tools for that. Like I think emotional intelligence is a big one, especially because they kind of teeter that line between being the supervisor's, for lack of a better term, right-hand man. We kind of refer to them a lot, but they're also on the floor and they're working with the floor staff. So it is a unique position. They have to kind of balance that line, and they have to have good emotional intelligence and, know when things are confidential, because they could have a little bit more privileged information than the rest of the floor staff would.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Alaina. And I see that we have Amy back. Amy, we were just doing a little bit of Q&A in the meantime, so I'll turn it back over to you if you're ready.
No, my heart is warmed. Thank you so much for Chris jumping in. She would be familiar, of course, with all of the things that we're doing. So thankful. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be so many opportunities to chat about these things, and it really sparks little, plant seeds and sets off light bulbs. And so I love that. To pick up where I left off, this is one example of a tool, and like Chris was saying, it is, and why I think about it through that strengths lens is that different supervisors may benefit from a different style of tool. Both of the example 1 and 2 that I have listed here, and they are attachments to the participant manual as well. They're Word documents. They can be modified constantly to help stay on track of whatever new pilot project we're checking for or we're watching for, or if a supervisor is having a really hard time remembering this one thing, they can modify their tool. You'll see they are similar in what they're asking for, because we have minimum standards, and then we have those things that soups want to see too. And how they get documented really depends on the strengths of the supervisor. You'll see that this is more of a qualitative approach, because, as Ruth mentioned, we have LEAPS in San Diego County now, and that replaced a previous case management system. And both of those can run reports so that we can get more context. So we can run those reports for the quantifiable data points, and we can provide context with these checklists and these case closing tools that we use. You can move to the next slide too. There are much similar language used here, but you can tell it's just a different format for a different way that a supervisor views their lens and how they want to. This one has a lot more open space. This one can offer, some extra place for the supervisor to write questions they have or things they might see, and specifically has reminders of updating many of the same things that were listed on the other one, just in a different form. It's still checking for those minimum standards. It's just done in a different format. If we go to the next slide, we move to the benefits of I included those tools in, even though they are checking many of the same things, because it shows the benefits to the supervisors and the workers really through a strength lens for the supervisor when using the tool, that we're checking for the same things, but we're allowing some flexibility. But it increases consistency for the supervisor and their workers too, because the same supervisor is using the same tool with all of their workers. So they're checking for those things. And they can be modified so that you can have less things. You don't have to check as many things. Different supervisors are going to have some things based upon their training. If they have a huge background in domestic violence, they may want a few more things specifically in every case that have to do with safety planning. They may have a few buzz things that they're specifically looking for. These are great things to encourage in our supervisors. And when they get more of that context, they can bring it back to the program, and maybe we want to all incorporate those things. Maybe they're sharing those things in our supervisors meetings where we're all talking about what's working well, right? Because QA is so focused on what's working well too. That's the part that we love, because we want to increase what's working well. It gives our supervisors an opportunity to very easily provide timely feedback that's individualized to the worker, that puts that feedback not just in the ether of, hey, it's great if you use a cognitive screening tool with this client, they're 85 and, let's try and, they don't have a diagnosis. It would have been great. Even better if you can take it to specific case practice, right? Not just, hey, let's use the mini cog more often. But where are cases where there were things that maybe would have made us use that more. And this does that so that when you go to supervision, a supervisor can look back over how many closings have they done this week or this month for that worker. What were the things that looked really great? Are there patterns of things that keep getting forgotten? Are there things that you want to know more about what they did on it? They ask them if they are leaders, asking them if they want to share in a unit meeting or share at another venue, something that you see them doing that is so great and you'd like to see more people doing, right? Are they willing to share with their peers what their case practices are? It does help with their performance and with setting SMART goals. I have several workers who have set SMART goals that say, I really do want to use the cognitive screening tools that we have offered to us, or I want to remember that we have those depression screening tools, or different things like that. Those can be the need for that can be highlighted in this QA done at the supervisor level, but also the tracking of the progress and how well they're meeting those goals can be used that way through these tools. And then you get to highlight it, and you get to be like, oh, you set this goal, and here's where you're at in your feedback. And then at the end of the year, you get to say, oh, you wanted to increase your use of the dementia screening tools, and it looks like you've done 20 of those in the last 6 months. That's a fantastic increase. How does that feel? Are there things that are there takeaways from that? So it highlights what training opportunities could be available to the individual worker. But also, if I'm noticing a pattern in my unit across a lot of my workers, then it's maybe a reflection on how I trained that item or how I'm talking to them about the need for something. It's a reflection back for the supervisor to be like, hey, maybe this is something we need to talk about at a unit meeting because I'm seeing it over and over and over again. With the transition to LEAPs, there were a lot of those things. There were a lot of those things that the workers are great workers, but where we documented needed to change. And I could see where I might have let them down, or where I need to elevate something to the management or to policy and say, hey, we're not clear in my unit on this. Are other supervisors doing something different? What do you want us to be doing on that? So there's a lot of benefits to the supervisors and the workers to be able to have this done in it's qualitative, which speaks to more to workers, right? Because it's about a case. It's about best practices. It's about what they did well. It builds relationships between the soup and the worker while they're having those discussions too. Next slide. This is I could have gone on and on and on with examples of tools. This is a different one. I included this one specifically because it's a different format. It's an Excel spreadsheet. that this supervisor uses. Down at the bottom, you can see they do a different sheet for each of their staff members. They only have 3 listed here, and they actually have 7 right now, but that's okay. I changed it up a little bit for the purposes of this. But they have those minimum standards that I talk about across the top. So they obviously, a new supervisor would have a very difficult time using this because it doesn't clearly point out what are the 242 exact measures, or what are the options for allegations or things like that. This is used by a couple of supervisors, or something similar to this, a couple of supervisors who've been doing this quite a while. And they just want the reminder, and they just want a log to be able to log how many they've done, right? And so that if they return a case, or if they need to make changes, or they want to see those patterns, they have a place to go to for that information. So they don't have to remember in their head what that one worker keeps forgetting versus what another worker keeps forgetting, or which worker is doing really great follow-up with the primary care physician, and which one is, which ones are doing really great warm handoffs with, with a case management, or a strength-based case management, after they've made a referral. So you could see that this is checking the same things that the other tools were in a totally different format. And so I thought it was neat to include. It's not actually the way my brain works, but I liked it. And I feel like I can see how this gets to, it can still be modified very easily. And this could be a great start for the place to start. This could be how a county that doesn't feel like they're doing using QA at case closing. This could be a really easy one to pick up and just be like, okay, we could start tracking this like that. You could do, someone who's very savvy in Excel can do really amazing things in there too, where they're doing radials, or they're doing options, so that you can have drop-down lists. And then they also quantify, right? Because you used Excel. So it isn't just the warm, touchy social work stuff where you're talking with your social worker in one-on-one supervision, but you could actually pull some numbers from it too. So
One more minute, Amy.
Yeah.
1 more minute.
Okay. Then we'll go to the next slide. I've touched on a few of these challenges as we've gone through already. And of course, these will be like preaching to the choir. So this is a little easier, right? We all know caseloads are high. Resources fluctuate, and including staffing shortages or turnover, unclear expectations and changes. Our big one this year was switching over from our homegrown case management system to LEAPS. It didn't mean that our case practice needed to change. It meant where we document it, how we document, the reports we could pull, all of those things were changing. So it was, how do we still do the great stuff with a different system? Right. And so that was helping everybody through that process, changed a lot of what we needed to do for our QA and how it looked. And then the last slide just touches back on those helpful reports to run. So the tools I gave are qualitative, right? Those are helpful. We can quantify some of those. If you asked me, if I looked back on them for a month, how many this one worker did of this one thing, I could pull that. It's a little labor intensive, but for a month or for a small subsection, I can do that. It wouldn't be that hard to use my tools for it. But LEAPS pulls a lot of great reports, and managers can use them, but supervisors, these are ones that help with the supervisor QA. So we can pull worker documentation timeliness. We can pull that. I don't need to track that on my tool for case closing, when the activity occurred and when they created the note. I can do the same thing with 7-day worker activity. I can see which cases did they kind of put on the back burner a little bit, and why, right? Then I can go back to my case closing tool and see, why did that get put on the back burner? Oh, because they got 8 new referrals that week. So they didn't look at the ones that they got the week before, right? They were managing their new ones. The same thing with the closure reason by worker. We can pull that report so we can see if there is a higher number for one worker of unable to locate or refuse services. Those are the most common ones that we're often pulling, just to keep tabs on what's happening for that worker, what's happening for that unit, what's happening with outliers, right? The workers who have a really, really low unable to locate, What are they doing? That's so awesome. Is it possible we can use our strength-based lens to do a dyad partnership between a worker that's doing a really great job with that, with a worker who struggles with it, and have them partner together so that we can get the best out of both? So these reports help provide context too, for supervisors in doing their QAs. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really liked your graphic about expectations versus reality. Spot on. It's not like this, it's like all this.
Oh, for sure. For sure, right? I tell my workers all the time, my maximizer, I've got us shooting for the stars constantly, but reality is going to get in the way of those all the time, right? And we'll find our way together.
Definitely. Thank you. So now, group, you have an opportunity to ask some questions. So feel free to raise your hand or pop a question in the chat. And we've got our panelists here ready and waiting to answer your questions. Oh, good. Thank you, Stacy. How do you combine all the data from all the tools into one global data review? Who'd like to start that one, answering that one? I see you're off mute, Amy. You want to jump in?
I can. I think your case, Matt, the LEAP system pulls a lot of those. The LEAPs pulls a lot of reports, and then you can break it down to get more story from there. But I think when you're looking at bigger picture kind of things, data points that you're looking for, starting from where you already get some reports is a good place to start from.
Thanks, Amy. We've got another question in the chat. Where do you find the report on documentation timeliness in LEAPs? So I think that all of our presenters are from LEAPs counties. Where do you find that in LEAPs?
I would need to pull my leaps up. I can't just
I
think of the report name.
I'm looking to right now. It looks like while we're looking for that. Oh yeah, look, timeliness. There's the question about how long does it take for a supervisor to do QA per week? If that's directed towards me, I'm usually closing about probably 20 cases a week, 20 to 25 cases a week sounds about right. I think I close around 100 a month. So I usually kind of break them down and spread them out. Most case closing QAs for me take me about, for face-to-face cases, right? Usually take me about 15 to 20 minutes. But remember, it's incorporated in the closing review that I'm doing anyway. So it's just a matter of documenting in a standardized format what I'm checking for. So it's not extra on top of that. It's incorporated in. Now, sometimes with a newer worker or with a really seasoned worker that gets a really complicated case, then it could take me longer, right? If we've got 4 or 5 referrals, we've got all those RPs, we've got all of those different interviews and narratives, we've got a lot of collaterals or community partners, it could take a little bit longer to get through the QA on it, but it's part of my case closing. It's just check marking my boxes doesn't really add much to what I'm already checking and reading. And in fact, it saves me time later because I won't have to remember in my head what I loved, what I thought could be improved upon because I already have it in my notes.
Thanks, Amy. Diane, did you happen to find it?
So for leaps, so there's many different reports on kind of what timelines you want.
The question was about documentation timelines. And thank you, Chris. I see your, do you want to speak to your comment in the chat?
Yeah, I think this was one that it was available to administrators and we requested that it also be available to supervisors who would probably be the best ones to look at first. So there's probably a timeliness report, but might not be available to supervisors unless you ask LEAPS.
Let's see. I have
Thanks, Chris. Did you have anything to add, Diane?
Yeah, my timeliness one does not come up.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
And mine comes up as worker interview timeliness. So yeah, so it would have been if that was something that was requested so that we have access to it.
Okay, so it might
for
be a
us.
matter of asking LEAPS to adjust permissions so that supervisors also have access and not just administrator role. There's a suggestion to try looking in the administrator role. So we have another question in the chat. What are some strategies and best practices that your counties utilize to build relationships with leaderships and managers to get their buy-in to support QA initiatives? So let's start with that. And then it's a two-parter, but let's start with that. So for any of our presenters, what strategies and best practices did you use or have you used or do you use to build relationships with leadership in order to get their buy-in to support QA?
I think
Hi, Ruth. Oh, go ahead, Diane.
I know it just kind of comes slowly. We've already gone through 2 different program managers, but so I think we had a good relationship with our program manager, and she as well was a QA social worker at one point. So she understood the struggles and the importance. So she could bring that up then to like the deputy director who could actually make the decisions on hiring for another one. So I think it was just keep having conversations with our program manager and how the view of how we wanted it and how it could be collaborative. And so I can't think of like a pinpoint something. It's just slowly comes together.
Yeah, and that's very helpful foundational, is like us making sure that you do have you've established a working relationship, a positive working relationship, so that then as issues come up or there are things you need to discuss, that you're able to do that. Ruth, did you have something to add?
Well, that's my own county asking. So, but it reflects how in different periods we get different, we're in a position in our county where organizationally Child Protective Services and Adult Protective Services share the same department. And a piece of Child Protective Services, their quality, their data people, their policy writers, they're people that do the administrative functions for program, we sheared off and then taken to the department level to serve both CPS, the department administrative staff, and then senior and adult services, including IHSS and APS. So they've spent a year, trying to get to know the world of adult services, having spent 2 decades at more than 2 decades. There's always been this function, whether it's big or small, getting to know the CPS system. So now, as they transition and take on a new customer in senior and adult services, there they are, having to navigate all these personalities and relationships. And so my best recommendation is we need mapping. What are the things that we're going to work on? And then let's not overwhelm the system and the personalities, because, we end up with feedback. I don't want my managers overwhelmed with feeling like they're in meetings every 5 minutes trying to educate another part of our organization, when really those managers would rather be spending their time with supervisors. Or we don't want to, we all keep organizing the same meeting about the same thing, and we're realizing we're being very duplicative. So we need to step back and have more mapping as we continue with mutual goals, because we're really thrilled to have, this experienced group One of the people that was on here already, I gave him an assignment of just go play with leaps, go get to learn leaps. I've always wondered about recidivism. And he came back with the most fascinating information because he'd already built the model for CPS. So it was real easy for him to replicate while he was playing. And we learned all this great stuff about our practice that was fabulous. So yeah, I think the answer with relationships is continuous conversation and be mindful of, let's look at the percentage of how we're spending our time, because really I want my division, my program managers, not spending more than 3 hours a week with that staff that's doing the department level looks. I want the program managers spending certain periods of their time directly on the ground with our supervisors and our staff. And so we just have to be mindful of time and working it out. But again, we're all pretty conscious and committed to the same goals. So fortunately, I don't feel like internally we have organizational rifts of purpose and territory, thank goodness, because you see that in some places where nobody's grabbing their ball and holding it and not sharing.
Yeah, and you brought up an important piece too about understanding the structure. So understanding who's where and who's got the oversight and what that structure is like and what's the history. So that when you have questions or you have ideas or you have recommendations, that you've got some strategy about how to reach out, how to do that reach out in a way that you're more likely to be heard.
Yeah. And I have one more piece of wisdom that I tell any aspiring data analyst, and that is this. This is the one that I harp on all the time, and some people get it and some people think I'm silly. So you decide what works best for you, but that's this. Every question we ask has a cost. So if we ask 10 questions, we have 10 separate costs. Time truly is money. And every time we pull information, if you pull a data set of 100 clients, and each one of those clients, we're looking at one thing or we're looking at 10 things, the cost of it grows exponentially. And sometimes you get people at all levels of the organization that are the chronically curious, which means they're always asking questions again and again and again and again, not because they're irritating, but because they're interested and they care so much. Unfortunately, they don't edit the curiosity. And by not editing the curiosity, it sends a whole team of people off to go answer the questions. I wonder how many APS clients there are in the blah, blah zip code. So somebody runs off to go get that information because a manager asked, so they must mean it, not take it as I'm just wondering, So sometimes we're not real clear about what's an assignment and what's a curiosity. And for those of us that are in the management roles, we have to understand that when we ask a question, what's the cost of the question? When I say, how many people are over the age of 85 who are only living on Social Security, to go get that information in my county, that's about an 80-hour dig. So what am I going to do with that information? Am I really going to use it? Or is it just an interesting thing? So we have to be really mindful about what are we asking and why are we asking it? Because there are people out there that have to go get the information, and we just don't have unlimited ability to ask interesting questions, because it's all very interesting, but I don't know that we're using it for decisional purposes. And so that I try to be very mindful of the staff, that if I send somebody on a goose chase, that I have a purpose, that I'm going to make a decision with the information I request. But trying to train your managers, they don't like to hear that piece of feedback that I've just shared.
Thank you, Ruth. That's very helpful. I know we have more questions, and unfortunately, we need to move. Well, not unfortunately, but just the fact is we have a limited amount of time left together. And so we're going to move into the breakout groups. There are some folks jumping in to try to answer or provide some input in the chat to some of the questions that have been asked. But we want to make sure that you all have some decent amount of time to be able to talk to one another in the breakout groups about what you've heard, and maybe some of these questions make their way into the breakout groups. We have heard your feedback. Again, evaluation is very important. And so we heard feedback that it's really difficult to have a discussion in the breakout groups if all the people in the group haven't done the thing. So we have very intentionally crafted the breakout groups. Our intention is that there is at least one person in each group that has some level of experience with QA. So hopefully that will be your experience when you're in the groups. As we've been doing, we have Google Docs for each breakout group so that we can capture just very high level. We don't want any confidential or detailed discussions that you're having in your groups, but just any high level information that you would like to share. Please document that in the Google Docs. Sierra, what do folks need to know to be prepared to move into the breakout groups? Oh, one other thing, these are for county folks only. So we have some other partners, regional training academies and others in the audience, but the breakout groups are only for county folks. So the rest of us will stay out in the main group. Now to you, Sierra.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm just going to very quickly go over some breakout room tips. So please click join when the prompt comes up. And while you're in there, you can ask for help by clicking on the icon at the bottom of the screen if needed. That'll notify us that we need to head into your room. And you can also leave the breakout room at any time by clicking leave breakout room, and I can always put you back in. It's no problem at all. And when I end the breakout sessions, you'll be notified and given the option to return to the main room immediately or in 60 seconds. And on that note, Dawn, am I okay to open up the rooms?
Yes, please do.
All righty. See you all in a few.
Looks like we have a few folks who are assigned but haven't joined yet. Do any of you need help?
I confess I was multitasking and and missed the instruction, but I also don't see a place to join on my screen.
Yeah, so Joel, we're not adding you to a breakout group. We just have the county folks in the breakout
Okay.
groups. Yeah, so
Okay.
we'll all be out here. Sonia, Christy, Stacy, do you need help joining your breakout group, or would you prefer not to join a group? Good.
So Dawn, I missed it. What time are we calling everybody back?
We want to have everyone back. Well, we need to be able to start the wrap up discussion by 11:20.